Hello, thoughtful Libra. August may become one of the most meaningful months of your year, though perhaps not for the reasons you've been expecting. You have probably heard that this is a wonderful month for your sign, but those familiar predictions often sound pleasant without saying anything truly personal. They often promise change without explaining what kind of change actually leaves a lasting mark on your life. What if the greatest gift August offers isn't something arriving from the outside, but something within you, finally asking to be seen? What if this month isn't about receiving more, but about recovering a part of yourself that has quietly waited beneath years of careful balance and quiet restraint? For years, you may have become so skilled at creating harmony that few people ever noticed the quiet places where you felt unsettled yourself. You instinctively read the emotional atmosphere around you, sensing tension before anyone says a word, and often becoming the person who smooths it over without being asked. That ability is one of your greatest strengths, yet this month gently invites you to look at the hidden cost of carrying it all the time. Rather than testing you as a punishment, August may simply be asking whether the peace you create for others has left enough room for your own voice. As you continue listening, you may discover that your hesitation has never come from confusion, but from knowing your truth and wondering what it might change if you finally honored it. Sometimes the hardest decision is not discovering what you want, it's believing your own desires deserve the same consideration you've always given everyone else's. Many people imagine a remarkable month as unexpected opportunities, exciting news, or fortunate surprises appearing at the perfect moment. They picture life improving because circumstances suddenly become easier. For Libra, however, the deeper blessing may be much quieter than that. Real change begins when something inside you stops aching in silence. Imagine a beautiful gallery where every piece is carefully arranged, welcoming every visitor with grace and balance, while behind its elegant walls are unfinished canvases and rooms no one else ever enters. The gallery is admired because it appears complete, yet the spaces behind it hold the work that is still becoming, the pieces that haven't yet been given permission to exist in the open. In many ways, you've learned to become that gallery. You know how to choose the gentle words, soften disagreements, and smooth over uncomfortable moments, so everyone around you feels comfortable. You have an instinct for seeing different perspectives, and that gift often allows people to feel heard, even when they disagree with one another. It's a remarkable gift that builds trust, strengthens relationships, and helps people feel understood. Yet every gift asks for care, and when it is given without pause, something unseen begins collecting in the background. The parts of yourself that remain hidden don't disappear simply because they're rarely shown. They wait quietly, hoping that one day they'll receive the same patience you've so freely offered everyone else. Those unspoken moments leave their own quiet record. Every time you swallowed disappointment, every time you said it's fine before asking whether it truly was, another small entry was added to an invisible ledger. Each moment may have felt too small to matter on its own, yet together they slowly shaped the emotional landscape you carry every day. You may recognize its presence in unexpected exhaustion after a pleasant evening, or in irritation that seems too small to explain. These experiences rarely appear without reason. They often reflect emotions that never had the chance to speak in their own voice. What remains unexpressed rarely disappears. More often, it patiently waits until your body begins saying what your words never allowed themselves to say. There comes a point when that quiet account can no longer be ignored. Picture the scales so often associated with Libra, not as a perfect symbol, but as a real instrument where one side has carried just a little more weight for so long that the imbalance has become familiar. From a distance, everything still appears even, yet a closer look reveals constant effort simply to keep things from tipping too far. What once looked like effortless balance is actually continuous adjustment, a quiet compensation that only you can truly feel because you've been making those invisible corrections for so long. What makes this realization difficult is that no one may have placed that extra weight there for you. Somewhere along the way, yielding began to feel safer than disagreement, and preserving harmony became more important than expressing your own needs. Perhaps there were moments when keeping the peace protected an important relationship, and over time your heart learned to repeat that strategy even when it was no longer necessary. Over time, that pattern could look like kindness from the outside, while quietly growing from the fear of disappointing someone else. People often praise this as maturity or diplomacy, but perhaps the more meaningful question is this: whose peace has your maturity been protecting all along? And equally important, what has it quietly been asking you to give up in return? That question doesn't always arrive with an immediate answer, and that's perfectly natural. Sometimes the first step is simply recognizing the pattern without judging yourself for having it. Self-awareness grows more gently when curiosity replaces self-criticism. Libra's greatest strength has never been balance alone, but the ability to see value in others. You naturally recognize beauty, potential, and goodness in the people around you, even when they struggle to see those qualities in themselves. This month gently invites you to offer that same grace to yourself, noticing the difference between genuine harmony and the slow habit of disappearing so everyone else can remain comfortable. You deserve to become someone whose inner life receives the same compassion you spent years extending outward. If these thoughts stir something you haven't quite been able to name, trust that feeling instead of pushing it away. Recognition is often the beginning of meaningful change, because what is finally acknowledged no longer has to remain hidden. August may not ask you to wait for luck or for someone else to grant permission. It may simply invite you to make one honest choice before old habits quietly persuade you to keep smiling, keep yielding, and keep carrying what no longer belongs on your side of the scales. Sometimes one sincere decision creates more lasting balance than years spent trying to maintain an image of harmony. And perhaps that is what makes this month so meaningful, not because it changes who you are, but because it gently reminds you that your own voice has always belonged within the balance you've worked so hard to create. Tell me in the comments, when was the last time you gave up something that truly mattered to you, just to avoid disturbing someone else's peace? The quiet debt we've been talking about has a strange way of collecting interest. It isn't measured in money, it shows up as exhaustion. You may have experienced it yourself, leaving what should have been an enjoyable evening only to arrive home feeling drained without understanding why. It wasn't the gathering itself that exhausted you. It was everything you kept inside, the opinion you never shared, the boundary you didn't express, the moment you wanted to leave but smiled and said, "It's still early. Let's stay a little longer." Those moments seem insignificant while they're happening, yet they have a way of settling quietly inside you. One by one, they accumulate until your emotional energy is spent on carrying conversations that ended long ago, but never truly left your heart. Every thought left unspoken becomes another small payment made with the most valuable resource you have, your own energy. The difficulty with an invisible debt is that it rarely announces itself. It can quietly grow for years until your body begins asking for what your heart has postponed for far too long. It may appear as a tiredness that sleep cannot restore, irritation that feels larger than the situation deserves, or an unexpected desire to step away from everything without fully understanding why. Sometimes it shows up as feeling strangely disconnected during moments that should bring joy, or wondering why even simple decisions suddenly feel heavier than they used to. These aren't random moods. They're often quiet reminders that your inner world has been carrying conversations your outer world never allowed you to finish. None of this means you're weak or unkind. It simply means you've been carrying more than anyone realized, including yourself. What once felt like a temporary sacrifice slowly became your normal way of moving through relationships. When that hidden burden finally becomes impossible to ignore, the people around you are often surprised. They may say, "You always seem so calm. I had no idea it affected you this much." They aren't being dishonest. They never saw it because you became so skilled at hiding it. And after repeating that pattern for so long, there may have been moments when even you forgot how much you were quietly holding together beneath the surface. Every silent compromise concealed another piece of your truth, not only from those closest to you, but also from yourself. Each time you dismissed your own needs to preserve harmony, your inner voice became just a little harder to hear. Now return with me to the image of the scales. A scale doesn't stop moving simply because it's unbalanced. It continues to shift, constantly adjusting, giving the appearance of harmony. Yet if you look closely, One side is working much harder than the other just to keep everything from tipping over. The movement creates the illusion of balance, but beneath that motion is continuous effort that no one else can see. For much of your life, you may have mistaken that constant effort for healthy compromise. But true compromise is a choice made freely, not something driven by the fear of conflict. Too often, what you've called flexibility has really been an attempt to avoid uncomfortable conversations, awkward silence, or the possibility that someone might not approve of your honesty. From the outside, it resembles kindness. On the inside, it could quietly become fear wearing the mask of harmony. The difference between the two isn't always obvious in the moment, which is why this pattern can continue for years before you recognize that peace maintained through self-denial is rarely the kind of peace that truly lasts. Where did that pattern begin? No one can answer that with certainty. Perhaps it started with a childhood memory when disagreement brought distance instead of understanding. Perhaps you simply learned very early that keeping everyone happy felt safer than risking rejection. Maybe you watched the adults around you avoid difficult conversations and quietly concluded that harmony always required someone to remain silent. However it began, what started as protection gradually became a habit, and habits are repeated so often that they begin to feel like personality. After enough years, you stop questioning the habit because it starts feeling like this is simply who you are. That's why certain compliments can become surprisingly limiting. People tell you that you're easy to be around, that you never create drama, that you understand everyone's perspective. Those words sound generous, especially to someone who genuinely values peace. Yet hidden inside them is another message, that you're appreciated because you ask for so little of yourself and so much of yourself for everyone else. Over time, compliments like these can quietly become expectations, encouraging you to keep playing the same role even when that role no longer reflects who you're becoming. Imagine an actor who never removes the costume after the performance ends. Day after day, the role becomes so familiar that the person beneath it begins to fade from memory. The applause continues, but the authentic self grows quieter. It never disappears completely. It simply waits patiently until you're ready to remember who you were before pleasing everyone else became your greatest performance. Beneath every carefully chosen response and every polished version of yourself, there is still a voice that has never stopped hoping to be recognized. Not for how well it keeps everyone comfortable, but simply for being genuine. Perhaps that is the real invitation August offers. Not to wait for a perfect moment when expressing yourself will feel comfortable, but to recognize that authenticity rarely arrives under perfect conditions. It begins in ordinary moments, sometimes awkward, sometimes uncertain, yet deeply real. Real change often begins with conversations that are imperfect but honest, with boundaries that feel unfamiliar at first, and with the quiet realization that your own peace deserves the same care you've always offered everyone else's. Here's something many Libras have never been told in quite this way. Your indecision has rarely come from not knowing what you want. More often, you've known exactly what your heart was asking for. You were simply uncertain about what might change if you spoke it aloud. The question was never whether your inner voice existed. It was whether you believed it deserved the same respect as every other voice you had spent your life listening to. Think of a suspension bridge stretching across deep water. People trust it because they see its strength. But very few notice the foundation hidden beneath the surface that quietly carries the weight of everyone crossing above. In many ways, you become that unseen support. You've helped others feel emotionally steady, even while asking yourself to remain strong, no matter how much pressure rested on your shoulders. The bridge doesn't ask for recognition, yet without its hidden foundation, no one would reach the other side. In much the same way, you've often become the emotional stability that others rely on, while forgetting that even the strongest foundations need care, reinforcement, and moments of stillness if they're meant to remain strong for the journey ahead. There is a particular kind of loneliness that almost no one speaks about. The loneliness of being both indispensable and invisible at the same time. Everyone knows they can rely on you, yet very few stop to wonder who you lean on when your own foundation begins to crack beneath the surface. People recognize the calm you bring into difficult situations, the way your presence softens tension before it grows into conflict. They remember how often you've been the steady voice, the patient listener, or the one who quietly held everything together. What they rarely notice is the quiet cost of always being that person. Imagine how different this August could feel if you no longer believed that everyone else had to stand on your shoulders before you were allowed to feel safe yourself. What if the same stability you spent years creating for others finally became something you offered to your own heart? Notice how rarely anyone is asked who carries you when your strength begins to waver. Instead, the question has almost always been whether you're still able to keep carrying everyone else. And so often you've answered, "I'm fine," even when the most honest answer would have been a quiet, uncertain, "I don't know." Perhaps you've even convinced yourself that uncertainty was something to solve privately before letting anyone else see it. Yet the simple act of admitting you don't have every answer can become the beginning of a more honest relationship with yourself. One built on truth instead of constant emotional endurance. That simple admission has never been weakness. It may have been the first genuine truth you allowed yourself to feel, even before you were ready to speak it aloud. If August brings an invitation for Libra, it is not by accident. It gently illuminates the place where self-sacrifice has become so familiar that it almost feels like a virtue instead of a habit that quietly asks too much of you. Over time, repeatedly placing yourself second can begin to feel so natural that you stop recognizing it as a choice. This month invites you to notice that pattern with compassion rather than judgment, because awareness is often the first step toward restoring balance. Picture a lighthouse standing through countless nights, faithfully guiding ships toward safety. It shines without asking for recognition, always directing its light outward so others can find their way. Through storms, fog, and restless seas, it remains dependable, asking nothing in return for the guidance it offers. Yet almost no one pauses to ask whether the lighthouse itself ever needs warmth, rest, or a light turned inward. Its purpose becomes so familiar that people forget there is something living beneath the responsibility it carries. Perhaps this month becomes the moment that lighthouse slowly changes direction. Not because it stops caring about those navigating the darkness, but because it finally realizes its own path deserves illumination as well. And when that light turns inward, even for a moment, an unexpected truth begins to emerge. There was never a shortage of light. It had simply been shining everywhere except toward the one who carried it. Looking inward may feel unfamiliar at first, yet it also reveals how much wisdom, resilience, and quiet strength you've overlooked simply because your attention has always been focused somewhere else. There is a profound difference between helping someone because your heart freely chooses to and helping because you're afraid of what might happen if you don't. One grows from genuine generosity. The other grows from the fear of disappointing people who may never have needed you to carry so much in the first place. For many Libras, those two experiences have quietly blended together until they became difficult to separate. What begins as kindness can slowly become obligation, not because your heart has changed, but because your sense of responsibility has gradually expanded beyond what was ever truly yours to hold. The deeper lesson isn't about becoming less caring or less compassionate. It's about recognizing the moment your kindness begins excluding you from the very harmony you're trying to create. Real balance has never required your silence. It simply asks that your own needs be given the same dignity you've always offered everyone else's. The relationships that are meant to grow with you won't become weaker because you speak honestly. More often, they become healthier because they are finally built on authenticity instead of quiet self-denial. Then comes what may be the simplest step to describe and the hardest to take. Imagine standing before a gate that has never actually been locked. You always had the ability to open it. What made you hesitate wasn't the weight of the door, but the possibility of choosing something simply because it was true for you, without explaining it, defending it, or measuring it against everyone else's comfort. Sometimes the greatest barrier isn't outside of us at all. It's the belief that our choices only become acceptable once everyone else understands or approves of them. That is the quiet invitation August extends. Not effortless luck falling into your lap, and not an overnight transformation that erases years of familiar patterns. Instead, it invites honest choices. It asks you to speak your desires without immediately softening them with apologies or conditions attached. Those choices may seem surprisingly small at first: a boundary gently expressed, a preference honestly shared, or a decision made without seeking reassurance from everyone around you. Yet small choices, repeated consistently, often reshape a life more deeply than dramatic moments ever could. Of course, that feels unfamiliar after years of believing your role was to preserve everyone else's peace. But caring for someone and disappearing so they can remain comfortable have never been the same thing, even if they often appear similar from the outside. One creates healthy connection. The other slowly teaches you to abandon your own voice. Lasting relationships don't ask one person to become smaller so the other can feel secure. They create enough space for honesty, mutual respect, and the understanding that both people matter equally. As that distinction becomes clearer, something within you begins to settle. The invisible weight you've carried for so long no longer needs to remain entirely on your side of the scales. Piece by piece, burdens that were never truly yours can be set down, allowing balance to become something natural instead of something maintained through constant effort. You may discover that peace feels very different when it grows from authenticity rather than constant emotional management. It becomes less about keeping everything perfectly balanced and more about trusting that you no longer have to carry every imbalance yourself. Perhaps this is the real gift August offers Libra. Not a series of fortunate events arriving from somewhere beyond your control, but the rare experience of feeling your inner world and your outer life finally moving in the same direction. The harmony you've spent so many years creating for everyone else finally finds its way back to the place where it has always belonged within you. When your inner values begin guiding your outward choices, balance stops feeling like something fragile that could disappear at any moment. It becomes a quiet confidence that travels with you wherever you go. There is no single moment that transforms years of habit overnight. Lasting change begins with one honest decision, followed by another. August may simply provide the conditions for that beginning, inviting you to stop waiting for permission to take up space in your own life. Growth rarely arrives all at once. More often, it unfolds through ordinary moments in which you choose yourself a little more honestly than you did the day before. Until those choices gradually become your new normal, Libra has always possessed a remarkable ability to bring balance wherever they go. Perhaps the deepest lesson of this month is realizing that true harmony is never complete until you include yourself within it. Not as an exception, not as the one who always sacrifices, but as someone whose needs, voice, and well-being have always deserved an equal place on the scales. The balance you search for was never meant to exist only between you and the people around you. It was always meant to begin within you, because every lasting form of harmony grows strongest when the person creating it is finally included in it as well.